Good morning. These are terrible times when we should be together, when we've all flown apart. 2 wars are taking place in our world. 2 wars that nobody needed, nobody wanted, and certainly the world can't afford to have. Wasn't our doing. No, it wasn't. When you look at the history of Hamas, and I've kind of rescanned a book that was recommended by The Economist on Hamas by Beverly Milton Edwards. It's supposed to be a definitive volume. I'm not so sure. I remember the history of the Gaza Strip. I remember when there were kibbutzim on the borders of Gaza that predated the state of Israel. But then again, not many of the Arab states did indeed predate by very long the state of Israel. In 1946, Jordan became an established nation. Round the same year, so did Syria. Saudi Arabia came together in 1932, and all this was because of the urgings of Great Britain, the large colonial power that came up with the Balfour Declaration in 1917, knowing beforehand that there was going to be a state of Israel and all the Arab states to follow. So it was no mystery that Israel was going to exist in their midst. The mystery was, how would they accept this Jewish state? And the answer is clear. They didn't. As soon as Israel became a state in 1948, the fledgling states and Egypt went to war against Israel. And then, after the 6-day war, Israel got Gaza. And really, they didn't know what to do with it. So they went in and not really occupied Gaza. They had kibbutzim in Gaza up to 2005. They had 300 hydroponic plants. They had industry. They were trying to interweave their societies so that there would be peace and there would be government. I'll recheck the 1967 date. But Israel was embedded, not occupying, but embedded with the Gazans until Sharon took them out in 2005. What Hamas did afterwards, that had nothing to do with Israel. There was a fight for power between Fatah and Hamas won. And they won at a terrible cost. The same refugee camps that have been bombed recently by the Israelis or collapsed because nobody realized how many tunnels were really under them, those same buildings were bombed and torched by Hamas and Fatah, fighting for power. Hamas won, but it didn't mean it was a safe space for the Palestinians or the Gazans in that territory. Many of them, because they had sided with Fatah, were jailed, tortured, and released to buildings that had been destroyed. So what do we see? We see a Hamas that's always fighting. And they told the Gazan people point blank after they won the elections that they really didn't want to govern. They wanted to fight the Israelis, get rid of the occupiers. But there were no occupiers in Gaza. Gaza was free and clear of the Israelis prior to that time. So why couldn't they build? Why couldn't they just leave the hatred behind and build a community? They've got so many universities in Gaza. There is an upper class in Gaza. They teach sciences, engineering, wastewater management, sanitation. They also teach Sharia law, English, and Arabic. But where is the government? Why is the government coming from the UN? And from what I can see, the UN is not providing a government structure. Do I feel badly that people have died in Gaza? You bet I feel badly for innocent people. But that's not the doing of the Israelis. That's Hamas telling the people to go back. Over 800,000 have left the north. There are still Palestinians who are following Hamas and going back home. To their peril, unfortunately. Well, now, as the Israeli army is moving on towards Gaza City, I understand there's going to be a pause for humanitarian aid, a pause to get out foreign nationals, Americans, and a way for the Red Cross to get in and do its job and find out if the hostages are alive and well and being fed. If they were able to go into Nazi prison camps, the show camps, and determine, oh, everyone is in good health, certainly they should be able to go into Gaza under Hamas rule and determine, is everyone in good health? And then they can report back. I think that's a necessity at this point in time. Once we have the ceasefire briefly, so that humanitarian aid can get through and the injured can be transported to hospitals either on the sea or in Egypt, this is the time to ascertain the health and well-being of the hostages. Because Israel has two reasons to be in Gaza. One is the release of the hostages, and the second is to clean out Hamas. Because Hamas has been getting weapons smuggled into the country, first from Egypt and Iran, and then from anyone else who will give them arms. Tremendous troves of ammunition have been destroyed. So, what have I learned from my book on Hamas? Not much more than the history I already know, except for the fact that Hamas cannot do two things. It either conquers or it governs, and it doesn't prefer to govern. So with Hamas, The population of Gaza is fooling themselves. They are allowing a terrorist organization to use them as a human shield. And now that push has come to shove, they've told that population their lives are dispensable. Because Hamas intends to keep their food and keep their fuel, and the hospitals run dry, they really don't care. Their identity is tied up in their ability to fight. Well, in the 21st century, when we've now got winds lashing Great Britain at 100 miles an hour, and France and other countries experiencing over 100-mile-an-hour gales, this is not a time to have a man-made disaster, another man-made disaster. We've created our own weather disasters, and now we still have a couple of barbarians, and they really are barbarians, Russia and Iran and Hamas, who don't think that the status quo is good enough, that they like to make chaos and create pollution and toxins that will destroy our world even quicker. It's a pity. It is really a pity that we have to go through this. It is a pity that people suffer and die because of despots. But they're part of human nature. As Maimonides would say, we're all God's children. To reach the higher plane of being God's children, what we've got to do is learn how to govern, learn how to think, learn how to use our intellect, and become merciful and charitable to others. Because when we are, we can do so much more. I know fusion's around the corner. I kind of bet that Buffett with Occidental Petroleum and his partnership with Bill Gates are going to join forces for fusion technology. And they're going to use natrium salts wherever they can instead of lithium. So it's a really interesting world. It is a world that wants to make quantum leaps on one hand, and on the other hand, people who wants to bring us down and back to the savage wars of old. This is a time when we should all be pulling together. Truthfully, I'm pretty thankful that the Arab states have been so quiet about what's happening in Gaza, because it doesn't look like anyone wants to help out, condemn, or really come to grips with the barbarism that's been presented. On the good side, yours truly has just been banned from parts of TikTok. I wasn't allowed to say anything about Russia because that was against guidance to the community. Now that I've said something about the UN and Gaza or Hamas, that too is against TikTok's guidelines. So if you think TikTok is not owned by China, think again. There are some topics that just don't get through. So I think that's kind of humorous. I've been banned on YouTube from speaking in Russia, and now I've been banned on TikTok from talking about Russia, Hamas, Gaza, or the UN. So, can't catch a break. Trying to put an interesting take on what I see. Trying not to cry when my heart is broken. In Yiddish, we call it laughing with yashikas. We laugh instead of crying. Though we may be crying, you can't see it. This is very serious business. And what's happened is very serious. And boys have perished in defense of their country, just like they've done for generations in all of our countries. My father fought in World War II. My son was supposed to go to the first Gulf War under Herbert Walker Bush. My grandson is in the Army. I'm a proud mother and grandmother of young men who serve their country and serve their Constitution. And I'm proud, very proud. And I do know the consequences. So for all those 16 boys, we say Kaddish. And anyone else who has fallen in battles, useless battles, and perished, we say Kaddish. And may their memories be a blessing to all their families. Thank you for listening, and God bless.